March 14th, 2021, service event of the North Texas Church of Freethought. It is Pi Day, so happy Pi Day, everybody.
Infernal engine.
Later in the day, it gets more precise. Today, right now it's only 314, but later it'll be 3141529 however, you know the thing. This is what we can all say now. We just borrow from the president. You know the thing.
It's a
At any rate,
512 repeating decimal.
There you go. Correct. At any rate, if you're seeing this on YouTube for the first time, or I don't think we have any newcomers on the actual live call right now, but the North Texas Church of Freethought is a different kind of church than what many people are used to thinking about. If you've ever been to a Unitarian church, you may get a sense of the flavor, but we're not into woo-woo, not at all. But we think it is very important to explore the whole human condition, the human predicament, what it means to be ourselves and human, which is basically any subject at all. And to us, that is what religion is. Science, of course, is on the objective side. The scientists will argue things out in terms of what kind of data is being beamed back from Mars. That is truly objective information because everybody's got the same thing. Absolutely. It's not even coming in through your separate eyes, basically, but coming in through the Perseverance rover's eyes. But when it comes to religion, remember Martin Luther King said, that which your heart confides in, that is really your God. So rejecting the idea of a personal supernatural God that listens to prayers and all this sort of thing in favor of thinking about what it is like to be the ideal person, ideal being. If only we could be all powerful. We're not, certainly don't think that we are. And morality does not come from anybody just making it up. It comes from a cooperative effort, the same as science. So today's presentation we're calling the Infernal Engine. And again, by the way, if you're joining us on YouTube afterwards, go ahead and click that little bell icon so that you get notices of our uploading. And go to our website, churchoffreethought.org. All of our services are different. This is not some kind of ritual where we chant the same things over and over. If you don't really like today's service so much, go to another service and tool around our website. I bet you will find something of interest. So I've called this the Infernal Engine today because when I was in elementary school, I remember history being so boring. But I do also remember being taught that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. And I remember not being told what it was or even what a gin is, which of course I had heard, or I would later hear the word used to mean a kind of an alcoholic drink or as a verb, for example, to gin up, meaning to make something happen, to contrive circumstances, usually on some pretext or with bad intentions. In fact, the gin in cotton gin is just short for engine. And I'm sorry if I'm insulting you if you already knew that, but gin can be used to refer to a machine of some kind. Apparently in the day, cotton gin meant basically cotton machine. It had a more generic term, this word gin. So what does a cotton gin do? Well, the cotton plant blooms produce bolls of cotton, these big balls of cotton, but the cotton fibers are attached to the cotton seeds, and you have to separate those. You couldn't make blue jeans with all kinds of cotton seeds stuck in them. Once you separate the cotton fibers, then you can make things with the cotton. And from the seeds, you can also get things like cottonseed oil, and the remains after you crush the oil out of the cotton seeds is cotton meal, which can be used for animal feed and so forth. So you can use all of these products. Before the cotton gin, it was very laborious to separate the cotton fibers from the seeds. It had to be done by hand, and this made it not very profitable to grow cotton, especially the so-called short staple kind. You see there's a long staple and a short staple on the bottom right there, which has to do with the length of the fibers. The longer staple is the more luxurious cotton because you don't have so many little ends of the cotton making the fabric rough. So that's the so-called Egyptian cotton or Sea Island cotton, but it's more difficult to grow that. It's more fastidious in terms of what kind of climate it can grow in. So when Eli Whitney, who was a Yale graduate of 1792, so he would have been about 27 at the time, when he visited Georgia and learned about this, he figured he could make a machine to do the job, and so he did. He was issued a patent for it 2 years later in 1794 on this very date of March 14th. Now, some say Whitney's cotton gin caused the U.S. Civil War. Had I been taught this as a child, I think I would have found it much less irrelevant and boring. I think even now that would make people sit up. What? How can it be? Whitney died decades before the outbreak of the Civil War, and in 1825, the Civil War broke out in 1861. Whitney's intentions were certainly good. He wasn't even from the South. He was from Connecticut. In fact, although he became famous for inventing the cotton gin, he never made the fortune he had hoped for because he was not able to enforce the patent. People would just make their own cotton gins. They knew how it worked, and so that's how it would go. Well, Whitney eventually succeeded in the business of manufacturing arms for the U.S. military in the early 1800s, famously selling his concept with a demonstration before Congress. He went in with 10 of his rifles that he manufactured. He disassembled them and mixed up all the parts and then reassembled 10 working rifles. So that's how he really stuck in the public mind. It's been said since that that was faked, but as we know, interchangeable parts was in fact the future of manufacturing. But the cotton gin transformed the American South by making the cultivation of cotton profitable. And just at the same time that mechanization created a huge demand for cotton to supply the textile mills in England. That's a huge part of British history, all the cotton mills that they had there. I think there was even a famous fire in one of them where the cotton caught fire. But King Cotton in the American South became the basis of the economy there. But slave labor was also a mainstay of the American South. And some say it was on its way out as the 18th century came to a close, but the cotton economy revitalized it. For with the growth of cotton, there came the growth of slavery. And as you see there, in 1790, before the cotton gin, you needed 3.5 people to produce a pretty tiny amount of cotton. By 1860, you needed more slaves, but look how much more cotton you could produce. It was just exponential improvement. And here's that same information in tabular form. So along with cotton, slaves also became disgustingly a commodity. I hesitated to even put this up. It's pretty disgusting, the value of stock in slaves. And of course, this is what retarded the abolition of slavery. People, they'd spent a lot of money on their slaves. They didn't want to lose all that. But you know what? All the other churches have a hand in this because the Holy Bible, as the slave owners of the South knew very well, is fully in support of this. And it points out that if one of your slaves should not immediately die, that the slave owner should not be punished because, after all, the slave is his money. Interestingly, the majority of whites in the antebellum South did not own slaves, but pretty much everyone, in one way or another, was dependent on King Cotton. It would be pretty hard to be against slavery when everybody around you and you yourself were making money off of the cotton economy. How else would you survive? And this goes to something we've talked about before. When you know a certain thing, you live a certain thing, it's hard to imagine any alternative. People have difficulty thinking past their current beliefs, their current circumstances. Well, here we see on the left how and where cotton production increased from 1820 to 1840, and how slavery pretty much went away in the regions not growing cotton over on the right-hand side, but it increased and intensified where cotton was being grown. Here's some more graphics showing this. I'll let you just look at that for a moment. The beauty of YouTube is you can just hit the pause button. And this shows the states that seceded to form the Confederate States of America. And those states made it clear that it was all about maintaining the institution of slavery. It wasn't about anything else. It was about slavery. In his famous Cornerstone Address, Confederate States of America Vice President Alexander H. Stephens, you see him up on the top right. It's amazing how young he looks. I'm not sure how old he was in that picture, but most of the pictures you find of him look pretty much like that, although some look more craggy. He said the prevailing ideas entertained by Jefferson, so he's talking about the Declaration of Independence, were wrong. Fundamentally wrong, because they rested upon the assumption of the equality of races. And this was an error. The CSA's cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery is his natural and normal condition. Now, where did this come from? The founders don't talk about race and racial superiority and all of that sort of thing. This all came up after the founding of the country. So, yes, the original sin was allowing slavery, and of course, as we know from looking back over the historical documents, the people of the northern states, they didn't like it, but they wanted to accommodate the southern states because they wanted to hang together. They did not see that they would be able to break away from Britain if the southern states stayed with Britain, or if they did not all hang together. But if the founders and most of the leading statesmen, as Stevens himself said, rejected the cornerstone of the CSA, how did it come to be that Stevens and so many others came to see it as so fundamental? Well, it was the economy, stupid. Even before King Cotton, slavery created what we now know as cognitive dissonance. And this conflict between ideas and practices, where the practices served strong self-interests, meant that the cultural concept of race, which in the 18th century had been floating around for a few centuries since the time of the Spanish Reconquista, there's a whole history there, and you can read up on it, that had to be made into an unquestionable and fundamental truth, which is to say, a dogma. How else could you treat people the way they treated the slaves of the South unless you believed that they were nothing but animals? And it was. Much to the shame of the scientists of the day, it was made a scientific dogma. Prominent scientists, including Louis Agassiz at Harvard, actually promulgated the idea that Africans were a different species, not even human. This is how people could be treated as if they were beasts, by believing that they were beasts. And of course, this became settled fact as the 19th century wore on, and we saw that it reached its ultimate expression in Nazi racial ideology and policy. But in part, thanks to Darwin, to better understanding of genetics, to the discovery of DNA and its workings we talked about last time, and finally the Human Genome Project, we now know that the idea of race in humans is complete, idiotic nonsense. There are no genes for race. In fact, there can be more genetic differences between two quote-unquote black people than between a black person and a white person. Not only that, but there are numerous inapparent differences between people, including the presence or absence of certain muscles. I mean, we're talking about really fundamental stuff. And other structures, blood and tissue types, physiological functions, and molecular workings that can be far more consequential than the degree of skin pigmentation, which itself varies among people of the same family. People of the same family, some are lighter, some are darker, and in general we found that women tend to be a little bit lighter than men in pretty much all groups, all families, because they need to make a little bit more vitamin D for the support of the babies that they grow. And how about handedness? Whether you're left-handed or right-handed goes far more to your basic neurological function than how much melanin you have in your skin. But this stupid idea almost destroyed the nation, and it lingers, as so many wrong ideas and stupid beliefs do. Interestingly, cotton production in the USA, while it fell in the 1860s, understandably, while the war was going on, and when the war was over and they started producing cotton again, by the way, the prices were terribly depressed because Britain had found other sources, so all this additional cotton was flooding the market. But you see, by 1880, cotton production in the U.S. had recovered completely, and then from there on continued to increase. By the beginning of the 20th century, it was twice what it was at the outbreak of the Civil War. It certainly didn't die away. But then, look what happened to the cotton gin. The Industrial Revolution has come a long way after a rocky and in many respects a savage start. Those are modern cotton gins up at the top, by the way. Pretty impressive compared to the original version down in the bottom right, huh? Even the abolition of slavery did not improve things, of course, for many former slaves, and in some respects it made things worse. When you're not someone's money, people can care even less about you. So here's the real infernal machine. It's the machinery of our own minds that cause us to accept the obvious instead of facts and reason. And the interesting thing, you look at both sides of these us and them, when the people on one side or the other hear what they hear, they never even consider another way of putting it. So when they talk about the primitive superstition of those foreigners, They're not even thinking about their own religion, which is probably just as or more stupid than those of their so-called enemies. Here are more examples of what has come to be called spin. It's easy to recognize when you see the comparisons and contrasts, but as I said, when you see or hear the news and read what's purported to be considered analysis, we have to remember that how ideas are expressed are a part of the ideas themselves. Not only that, but what others want us to believe will always be presented in the best possible light. And the ideas that we are intended to reject will be presented in the worst possible light. And you can certainly have this proven to you every day. Go on the internet with these news feeds. Sign up for a super conservative right-wing type of news feed, and then do the same for the other side, for the leftists. And you'll start seeing that. It will make you ashamed. But we must make an effort to appreciate that every point comes with a point of view. It doesn't mean that there's no truth, as postmodernists would have us suppose, but it does mean that we must think carefully and we must think critically. And more than anything else, that is what our church is about. In this same spirit, remember that the past is not just what happened decades or centuries ago. It is what happened last year, last month, last week, and yesterday. As I said at the outset, I found history to be so boring, but I realize now that because of the way it was taught to me, that was the case. In fact, I think the people teaching me found it boring also. But history is just stories. It's the story of humanity, of our story of us. And despite this business of people being condemned to repeat history, which sounds a bit like the idea of karma, where repeating life experience is a bad thing, I think the wonderful thing about history is that it is so often interesting. It's fascinating. And it so often leads us to think, and to think about what we would otherwise not even pay any attention to. By the way, in 1862, on this very date, the same date as Eli Whitney got his patent for the cotton gin, was something called the Battle of New Bern. And I had to look it up and read about that. New Bern is a kind of a intercoastal community in North Carolina, in the northeast part of North Carolina. And that was in 1862. From then on, the North held that. So basically, they were behind enemy lines. It was an important military target because it was on the coast, so it had a port, had navigable rivers nearby, 2 rivers, in fact, and railroad lines. And this was a place where a lot of slaves fled to. If they could get there and get behind the Union lines, they could be free. And this also tended to cause the Union, it provided impetus and motivation to create units of former slaves to fight on the side of the North in the Civil War. As you see there, in 1879, Albert Einstein was born. He died in 1955, but today is his birthday. Happy birthday, Einstein. And in 1934, Eugene Cernan, who died in 2017. Eugene Cernan's birthday today. Some of you know who Eugene Cernan was. Merlin, you know, I suppose. Eugene Cernan was the last man to walk on the moon. We all remember the first man, the first person, Neil Armstrong, but Eugene Cernan was the last person to set foot on the moon, and he wrote this little speech, and that's supposedly the official history of the last words said by a human being as they left the moon. But in fact, the last words, when you look at the transcript, was, "Let's get off." Somebody was trying to fix a camera, and it wouldn't work, and he just said, "Forget the camera, let's get off." That was the last word spoken by somebody, by the last human being to be on the moon. Here are our principles, and I try to restate them just a little bit differently each time. Just amazing, though, that they spell real. I mean, what are the odds? That has to be a supernatural thing, right? Reason, which we feel is extremely valuable because that is what is necessary to comprehend what is. Enjoyment, that is our pursuing happiness. One of the very things in the Declaration of Independence. And appreciation, that is how we recognize what is good. And of course, we don't appreciate what is not good, like slavery and things like that. Love, discovering meaning and purpose, which is okay to be different for each of us. You don't need to have a religion tell everybody that their meaning and purpose is the same for everybody. You find your own meaning and purpose, and in your own way, And that is really what your religion is. Don't, if you are an atheist, say that you have no religion, because your meaning and your purpose is your religion. Don't let the supernaturalists hog it all and control it and tell everybody else what religion is, because they're simply wrong. And as we move on to some discussion, which we're nearly at, then let's remember again that we don't want to let politics spoil civility. You'll never see a wrecking ball of sex or religion spoiling our civility, because we like to talk about those subjects, well, to some degree. A couple more principles of civility to think about is acknowledging others. And I think we do that pretty well. We want to try to hear from everybody and hear everybody's point of view, because everyone has a point of view. And then respect, not for other people's opinions, but for the fact that they have them, they're entitled to them. They got to those opinions in the same way that we got to whatever opinions we have. They didn't just jump into it because somebody told them, necessarily anyways. They probably thought it through. And so understanding their views is also a matter of understanding how they got to those views. And we need the views of other people. We need to have that information, just as other people need to know how we arrived at our views. Very important. And remember, too, that we are, as we say, embodied minds. That's a really good term to look up in Google, embodied minds. That is to say, our posture, our voice, our behavior, our body language, we think about that as something you read on other people, but those things are not just clues to our emotional state, but they influence our emotional state. So remember that as we interact with other people here and as you go through life. This is a nice quote from Bill Nye. Everyone you will ever meet knows something you don't. And our task should be, as we encounter other people, let them express themselves and find out that thing that they know that we don't. And then remember that Freethought is not free. Please visit, donate at our churchoffreethought.org website. We certainly do depend on the support of our members and anybody who wants to make common cause with us. I think it's a good cause. Visit us on Facebook and Twitter. Easy to find us there, North Texas Church of Freethought on Facebook, and just NTCOF on Twitter. And please go to our website. We're really full of a lot of material there. We depend on your continued support. And the most important reason we solicit support from you all, because we are doing together what none of us can do on our own, and that is true of so many things. We are social animals, and we are social animals because we are so much more effective when we pull together. And we don't even demand 10%. 9% is fine, even 8%. Give whatever you want, please. Even if it's just $1, shows you support us, and we appreciate that. Help us promote your values in this way. Live your commitment. If you believe what you believe, if you really believe it, then be the future you wish to see. Of course, if you're a believer, then don't go to doctors. And in fact, if you're a believer and you think that evangelizing is important and that the next life is so much better and important than this one, then please buy a plane ticket to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, or to Islamabad in Pakistan. Go out on the street corner, start preaching your beliefs, and you can see what happens. But, you know, if you get martyred, hey, it's all for the good, right? We'll go to question and answer, some discussion. Sorry, we always have fun with that. Not that we're wanting to ridicule people, but we certainly do ridicule foolish ideas. And until people understand that, they're kind of not going to be very enlightened. So